In the humid morning air of January 22, 1943, Second Lieutenant John George positioned himself among the rubble of a captured enemy fortification overlooking Point Cruz. Through his rifle scope, the same one his fellow officers had, ridiculed for weeks, he studied a massive banyan tree standing roughly 240 yards distant. At 27, George carried the title of Illinois State Shooting Champion, yet his combat record remained blank. No confirmed eliminations, nothing to validate his reputation. The situation had grown desperate. Japanese sharpshooters controlled the coastal groves, 11 of them, according to intelligence reports. In just 3 days, they'd claimed 14 American lives from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. The threat was methodical, invisible, and deadly. George's commanding officer had dismissed his personally owned Winchester Model 70 as inadequate for war. Other platoon leaders made jokes about his mail-order sweetheart when he'd unpacked the rifle with its Lyman Alaskan scope at Camp Forest, Tennessee. Even the armorer questioned whether such a weapon belonged on a battlefield. They'd shipped overseas before his rifle arrived, forcing George to watch other soldiers maintain their standard issue Garands, while his specialized weapon sat in an Illinois warehouse. 6 weeks after requesting its transfer through military channels, a supply sergeant handed him a crate marked fragile. Inside, the rifle he'd purchased with 2 years of National Guard wages. The weapon weighed 9 pounds, with the scope adding another 12 ounces. Standard military rifles weighed more, but offered no magnification. George's bolt-action design held 5 rounds compared to the Garan's 8-round capacity, despite direct orders to carry standard equipment. George brought his Winchester into the field. The 132nd had replaced Marine units in late December 1942. Those Marines had secured Henderson Field after months of brutal fighting, but Mount Austin and the coastal groves remained contested. The mountain slopes had cost George's battalion dearly: 34 killed, 279 wounded across 16 days of combat. Throughout that engagement, George never fired his Winchester once. The jungle around Point Cruz presented different challenges. No fixed defenses, just enemy soldiers who'd retreated westward and established positions in the enormous trees. Some were trained marksmen with scoped rifles, men who understood patience and knew how to read the terrain. They'd already proven their effectiveness. Want to discover how? George's civilian hunting rifle performed against professionally trained military sharpshooters in the jungle. Recent casualties had forced the battalion commander to reconsider George's capabilities. On January 19th, a sharpshooter killed Corporal Davis at a creek. The following day, 2 more men from L Company fell during patrol. January 21st brought 3 additional deaths, including 1 soldier shot through the neck near a tree. His unit had passed twice without incident. That evening, the commander summoned George. Enemy marksmen were eliminating his troops faster than tropical disease. He needed someone who could shoot back effectively. Could that privately owned rifle actually deliver results? George outlined his credentials: Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards in 1939, won at age 23 as the youngest champion in state history. 6-inch groupings at 600 yards using iron sights with the Lyman scope, 5 rounds within 4 inches at 300 yards. The commander gave him until dawn to prove it. George spent the night preparing. He cleaned the Winchester thoroughly, removing every trace of cosmoline from its ocean voyage. He verified the scope mounts, loaded 5 rounds of .3 U06 hunting ammunition, the same cartridge standard military rifles used, at first light on January 22nd. He moved into the captured fortification, overlooking the groves. The position provided clear sightlines across the coconut palms toward the large banyan trees. Intelligence suggested enemy sharpshooters operated from these giants, some reaching 90 feet, with trunks 8 feet thick. A determined shooter could climb before dawn and remain concealed all day. George worked alone, no spotter, no radio operator, just his rifle, a canteen, and 60 rounds in stripper clips. He settled into position and began scanning through his scope. The Lyman's 2.5x magnification wasn't powerful, but sufficient to detect movement invisible to unaided eyes. The jungle produced constant noise, birds, insects, distant artillery. George had learned to filter distractions and focus on visual anomalies. He glanced methodically, left to right, top to bottom. At 9:17 a.m., he noticed something. A branch shifted without wind, subtle but deliberate, 87 feet up in a banyan, 240 yards out. George watched. The branch moved again. Then he distinguished the shape, a human figure in dark clothing, positioned where 3 branches forked together. The enemy marksman faced east, observing the trail where American supply movements occurred. George made adjustments, 2 clicks right compensating for wind. He controlled his breathing. The Winchester's trigger broke cleanly at 3.5 pounds, adjusted during his peacetime training at Camp Perry. Now, he would learn whether a civilian target rifle could eliminate a professionally trained military sharpshooter. George squeezed the trigger. What happened next would determine not just his fate, but the future of American marksmanship doctrine. The Winchester kicked against George's shoulder. Its crack echoed through the jungle. At 240 yards, the Japanese sharpshooter jerked violently and plummeted through the branches. His body tumbled 90 feet before striking the ground near the banyan's base. George worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. He kept his scope trained on the tree, searching for movement. Enemy marksmen operated in pairs, 1 shooter, 1 observer. If George had just killed the primary, the spotter remained hidden somewhere nearby. He scanned the surrounding banyans methodically. The limited magnification forced patience. Each tree could conceal multiple positions. The canopy created shadows that made identification nearly impossible without careful study. At 9:43 a.m., he located the second target, different tree, 60 yards north of the first. This one occupied a lower position, perhaps 50 feet up. The soldier was descending the trunk, retreating. He'd heard the shot and recognized his exposure. George aimed, led the movement slightly, and fired. The second sharpshooter fell backward, his rifle clattering through the branches ahead of him. Both weapons and bodies hit the jungle floor within seconds. 2 shots, 2 eliminations. George reloaded from a stripper clip, hands steady, breathing controlled. This felt no different than Camp Perry competitions, except these targets returned fire. At 11:21 a.m., an enemy bullet struck the sandbag 6 inches from George's head, spraying dirt into his face. He rolled left immediately, pressing against the fortification wall. The shot originated from the southwest, a different angle than the previous engagements. George waited 3 minutes before repositioning. He inched back to his firing position and glassed the southwestern trees. The shooter would have relocated after firing, standard doctrine, but in jungle this dense, movement options were limited. He found the third target at 11:38 a.m. third tree from the left in a cluster of 5 banyans, 73 feet up. The Japanese marksman had moved to a different branch but remained in the same tree. A critical mistake. George placed the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired. The third sharpshooter fell silently. By noon, George had eliminated 5 enemy marksmen. Word spread rapidly through the battalion. Men who'd mocked his mail-order rifle now requested permission to observe. George refused. Spectators attracted attention. Attention drew fire. The enemy adapted after the 5th kill. They ceased daytime movement. George spent the afternoon glassing trees, finding nothing. At 4 p.m., he returned to headquarters. Captain Morris was waiting, mockery absent from his voice. He wanted George back in position at dawn, but the Japanese were learning George's methods, and they were planning their counterattack. January 23rd began. with heavy tropical rain that transformed the jungle floor into mud and reduced visibility beyond 100 yards. George sat in the fortification, waiting for conditions to improve. The rain stopped at 8:15 a.m. By 8:45, sufficient visibility had returned. George spotted his first target of the day at 9:12 a.m. The enemy soldier had climbed into position during the rainfall intelligent tactics, as the rain masked movement sounds. This marksman had selected a tree 290 yards distant, longer range than previous engagements. They were learning his capabilities. George compensated for distance and fired. The sharpshooter fell. The sixth elimination triggered an unexpected response. At 9:57 a.m., Japanese mortar began striking the area surrounding his position. They'd triangulated his location through muzzle flash or sound signature. The first rounds landed 40 yards short. The second salvo landed 20 yards short. The third would hit directly. George grabbed his rifle and sprinted north along the tree line, diving into a shell crater as the third salvo obliterated the fortification he'd occupied moments earlier. He relocated to a fallen tree, 120 yards north of the destroyed position. The trunk provided cover and maintained clear sight lines into the groves. George settled in and resumed observation. The Japanese sent additional marksmen that afternoon. They understood George was hunting them. Now they were hunting him back. This was no longer target practice. This was a dual dot. At 2:23 p.m., George eliminated his seventh target. At 3:41 p.m., he killed his eighth. This one had climbed exceptionally high, 94 feet up a banyan. Good concealment, but the altitude created a silhouette against the sky when the sun angle shifted. At 5 p.m., Captain Morris sent a runner to retrieve George. He'd been operational for 9 hours. Maurice wanted numbers. George reported 8 confirmed eliminations over 2 days. 12 rounds fired, 8 hits, 4 misses. Morris assigned George to continue operations starting at dawn on January 24th. That night, George cleaned his Winchester and considered the mathematics. 11 Japanese sharpshooters had been operating in the Point Cruz groves. 8 now, eliminated, 3 remaining. Those final 3 would be the best, the ones who'd survived longest. And now they knew exactly what George looked like and what rifle he carried. George loaded 5 fresh rounds and attempted sleep. At 3 a.m., he abandoned the effort and sat in his tent with the rifle across his lap. The rain resumed at 4:15 a.m. By 5:30. It was heavy enough to delay dawn operations. The final 3 sharpshooters were planning something George hadn't anticipated. The sniper's proof, Part 5 final. George used the rain delay to relocate to an unexpected position, a cluster of large rocks, 70 yards south of his previous location. Remnants of a Marine machine gun nest from December, the position offered solid cover and overlapping fields of fire into the groves. At 7:43 a.m., the rain diminished to drizzle. Visibility improved. George began glassing trees. At 8:17 a.m., he found target number 9. The Japanese soldier occupied a palm tree 190 yards out, positioned low at only 40 feet. Unusual. Most marksmen climbed high for better. This one had chosen concealment over elevation. George aimed, controlled his breathing, began applying trigger pressure, then stopped. Something felt wrong. The position was too obvious, too easy. George had been hunting for 3 days. He'd eliminated 8 men. The remaining 3 wouldn't make elementary mistakes unless this was bait. George lowered his rifle and scanned surrounding trees. If the palm position was a decoy, the real threat would be covering it. Waiting for George's muzzle flash, he glassed methodically for 11 minutes. At 8:28 a.m., he found the actual threat, a banyan, 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. Perfect concealment. The shooter had a clear line of sight to George's previous position at the fallen tree, waiting for him to appear there or take the bait. George made a decision. He aimed at the decoy, fired. The decoy jerked and fell. George immediately swung toward the battalion. The real sharpshooter would react to the sound, turn toward it. That turn would create movement. George saw the shift, put the crosshairs on target, and fired before the enemy could fully reposition. The real shooter fell, his rifle tumbling after him. 2 shots, 2 kills. But George had revealed his location. He grabbed his equipment and ran, dropping into a drainage ditch 40 yards away at 8:34 a.m. Japanese machine gun fire raked the rocks he'd occupied 6 seconds earlier. Over the next 2 days, George eliminated the final 2 enemy marksmen through careful stalking and patience. 11 total eliminations, 11 shots fired against the sharpshooters. 11 hits. Captain Morris recommended George establish a training program. By February, George had trained 32 men as 2-man sniper teams. Their section eliminated 74 enemy soldiers over 12 days, with 0 friendly casualties. George's Winchester Model 70 had proven a critical point. Individual skill and proper equipment could change battlefield outcomes. He later served in Burma with Merrill's Marauders, survived the war, earned 2 Bronze Stars, and wrote Shots Fired in Anger, a firearms classic still studied today. John George died January 3, 2009, at age 90. His Winchester resides in the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia, testament to the marksman who proved that precision, patience, and skill could outmatch overwhelming odds.